That's chassav learning. We should have the base in English. We'll start today in the first language. Everyone that means we'll start today. Yud Aleph Amud Beis and a Mishnah. It's a new piece. Bishama Yemer Mem Salkanas at Trisim B'Yomtiv Beisil Matirin Af Lahachzer. We quoted this Mishnah in passing. It has to do with taking the doors or the shutters off a store booth in the marketplace on Yom Tov. And is that considered building or not? Or taking it off and putting it back on? Is it considered destroying and building? Bishama says that on Yom Tov you're not allowed to do it. And Beisil says not only are you allowed to, but you're even allowed to return it. My trees in the Gemara asked, what are we talking about? It's doors of stores. Chanayas is a store, but it means a booth. Rashi points out that it's not attached to the ground. Remember last time we were talking about it's binyan b'kelim. So why binyan b'kelim? Because it's not actually attached to the ground. It's these little huts that they could move. I guess they had like marketplaces that were more like a fair, where people would wheel in their tables and everything, and then they would just set it up. Lined up on the side of the street. Probably. It may have been like a plaza area. So, Amar Ula, and Ula tells us, remember Ula was a traveler, we bring halachas from Eretz Yisrael. Ula tells us that Shloisha Dvarim Hatiru Sefer Mishum Tchilasan. There's three things that became permitted at the end because we wanted you to do them at the beginning. Sort of like you tell the doctors that they can drive back from the hospital because they don't want them to avoid going in the first place. Yeah, if I'm going to be stuck there, then maybe this can wait for after Shabbos. We don't want them to have to think like that. We want them to, if there's a possibility that this is an emergency, go right now, or whatever. So we tell them you can drive back, just so in their mind, they don't have to make any decisions that would be a factor in their decision. So Ula says there's three things that we permitted you to do at the end because we wanted you to do it initially. What are those three things? Orlif Nead Dorson. You're allowed to put the hide in front of people that are going to step on it. Why? Even though to step on it is part of the tanning process. But because we wanted you to shech the animal, we were afraid that you're going to say, I'm going to lose the hide. So we say, okay, you can spread it out. And there was a heter over there. Why? Because people can sit on it also. It's not specifically just for tanning. Okay. Trisei Chanuyas. You're allowed to return the shutter to the store because we want the people to open their store. Now, that's not actually buying and selling. It's buying on credit. People that ran out of things would go to the store and the person would give them on credit. But we want it to be open, so we say you'll be able to shut. We tell the storekeeper you'll be able to shut it, to close it up afterwards. And that you're allowed to return a bandage to someone's hand in the Beitza Mikdash. Now, bandages could be a problem of refuah. Rashi over here says that it's an issue of memachik. The Bach takes that out. You see, memachik means to smooth it out. There's an ointment on the bandage. You can't smooth the ointment out on the bandage. You're not supposed to smooth it. We don't use bar soap on Shabbos. You're not supposed to smooth it out. We use a liquid soap. You're not supposed to smooth out the things. If that has nothing to do with this, then it has to do with refuah, as we'll see in the Gemara. There's a rabbinic prohibition of doing medicines on Shabbos that aren't necessary for life and death, or for someone that's very sick. And we have a concern like this, that a kohen has a bandage on his hand. And he has to do the avodah. Now, when he does the avodah, he's not allowed to have anything interrupting between his hand and the knife or the vessel. If we tell him that he's not allowed to put the bandage back on, he may try to avoid taking it off. And then he'll do the avodah with it on. So we say, you're allowed to put it back on. That's why he'll take it off. So Hitiru Seifan, they allowed him to put it back on because we want him to remove it when he's doing a Beitza. Rachva Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rachva says, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, Rashi over here points out that some people say that we don't know who Rachva didn't know if he heard it from Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya or if he heard it from Rabbi Yehuda in Eretz Yisrael. So it says over here, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is not Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Cheskel was a student of Rav, a student of Shmuel. Anyway, Rashi rejects that. He says, Rachva never went to Eretz Yisrael. We don't find that he went to Eretz Yisrael. He learned from Rabbi Yehuda. And because he was a Talmud Muvaka, Rabbi Yehuda, he gets titled Rabbi Yehuda. Usually only people from Eretz Yisrael, only Amiran from Eretz Yisrael are called Rabbi. Others, they're from Bavel, are called Rab. Here it's Rabbi Yehuda, but because he was a student, such a great student of Rabbi Yehuda, he gets called Rabbi Yehuda. Interesting. So Rachba says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, two more cases. Apisei Chavis. Someone opens a barrel. Umaschul bisasei al gav haregel, and someone that starts a dough on Yom Tov. Okay. In order to understand this, you have to just give an introduction about Tumah. That there is a problem if an Amaretz would touch something. An Amaretz, we assume that he's Tameh, not careful with going to the mikveh or sheretz or other things. So we assume the thing that he touches is going to be Tameh. However, on the regel, on the holiday, we take off that assumption and we say that what he touches is tar. And so, therefore, if you open a barrel of wine and Amaretz comes to buy and takes him, we say that it's tar on the regel. What happens if there's leftover after the regel? There's a machlekes the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. Chachamim say the tumah goes back onto whatever's left. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it doesn't go back. Because on the regel, they weren't tamei. The question is what? Are they tamei? Or is, and we suspend, we ignore it because it's the regel, which means after the regel, it immediately resurfaces. Or do we say that we took the tumah off, and I know they touched it on the regel, but now you can still drink it because they weren't tamei on the regel. So Rabbi Yehuda says that you can finish it. Now that applies to dough that was made on the regel, on the Yom Tov, and also an open barrel of wine that you can finish it. Okay. Hitiru Seifan, they allowed you to finish it because they wanted you to open it up and to sell the wine and to do this. So therefore, if you would be concerned that after Yom Tov it's going to go to waste, then you wouldn't open it up. So they were matir. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that allows. So those are two more that Rachba adds in from Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah. Oh, the Chuya or Hutra. Yeah, it's similar to that. That's interesting. Two doors. Yeah, we did that yesterday. Right. You see, yeah, that was a discussion. If we said that was a discussion about that. I heard. Yeah, what we're discussing now is what's the status of the Amaretz on the regel. Do we say that there's no tumah at all? Or do we say that there is tumah, but because of the regel, it's suspended, and after the regel, it comes back? Or do we say that after the regel, there's no tumah? Yeah, after the regel, this for sure. The question is, how do we look at the rest of the wine that's here? Okay, now the Gemara says, Everything that that Ula just told us, that Seifan Mitshum Tchilasan, that he permitted this, there's no chiddush in anything that he said. I know he made a nice collection here, but each one of them, we have a Mishnah that taught this stuff. And just to collect things together is not anything that's significant for us. So it goes like this. Orlefnei Adarsin Tanina. We have a Mishnah that says Orlefnei Adarsin, that put the leather in front of the people that are going to trample on it, that's permissible. Uli, you taught me something. You didn't teach me anything. I know that from a Mishnah, that you're allowed to do that. The Gar says, 1 second. Mal the Tema, the pshat in the Mishnah is the Ula Torah. I could have thought, Tamaya de Besel Mishim de Chazil Mizgalayo, Vafila Meir Yamtiv Nami, that the reason for Beis Hillel is not because we want you to shech. I could have thought that the reason for Beis Hillel is because people can sit on it. It has nothing to, there's no isser at all. People can sit on that high, and it's just a mat for sitting. Now, what's the nafkamina? If it wasn't shechted on Yom Tov, it was shechted Erev Yom Tov, and you never took care of the tanning, but so what? On Yom Tov, you'll spread it out, and people will walk on it. And it wasn't even shechted on Yom Tov. So if I say that it's only because I want you to shech, so then it's only high that came there on Yom Tov. It was only because the animal was shechted on Yom Tov. Shechted Erev Yom Tov has nothing, there's no heter. So that's what Ula is telling me, is that if it was shechted Erev Yom Tov, there's no heter. If I just would have had the Mishnah, I would have thought that what's the reason why you're allowed to put the hide down on the floor for people to trample on? Because people can also sit on it when you're doing something that's mutter. So Kamash Malan, he tears from Mishum Tchilas and the Yom Tov in there of Yom Tov light. Only if it was shechted on Yom Tov. The reason why we allow you to do this is because we want you to shech. Our Mishnah, what are you telling me about the store, the shutters on the store that you're allowed to return it? That's the Mishnah that we just learned. Ula is not teaching me anything. Gemara says, no, he is teaching me. Because what I have said, I could have thought that has nothing to do with stores. Beis Hillel holds that there's no binyan by kalim. There's no building by things that aren't attached to the ground. It's not considered building. Legos. There's no such thing as building. Something comes off, a box, putting the lid back on, or anything in the house. If it's not attached to the ground, it's considered a keli, and you're allowed to fix it. Cabinet's attached to the house. A desk drawer or something, you could put it back together. There's no problem. That's what I could have thought. Beis Hillel holds that you're allowed to take the shutters off booths. You say no. Beis Hillel holds that there's a rabbinic problem of binyan b'kelim. In the Raisa, there's no binyan b'kelim, but rabbinically there is. We're matter you on Yom Tov because we want you to open the store for people that need items. But you can't do this for your desk drawer in the house that you want to put the handle back on or something. Okay. The chanuya is in the bottom line. It's only by the stores where we want you to open it up for people that need items.
So these storekeepers are
yeah.
Nobody's worried about somebody else. Come up all the time.
Yeah, I guess not.
That work?
The business, yeah.
Buying, selling, we're scammed.
With trust. Were there stores in Crown Heights that would open, like for people that just to get stuff?
What's the storekeeper? What's the opening? Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know. I assume they were present.
But then they stay like this.
Right. You're not getting paid on Yom Tov. It's like taking on trust. See you later. Okay. There were liquor stores around the show, the Big Daddies or whatever. The show about Harvard. That guy's on in Crown Heights. No, I remember people going. Yeah. There you go. Good morning. Okay. Yeah.
I was so drunk.
What about returning the bandage? A kayan that has a bandage on his arm or his hand. Can't be doing the avodah with the bandage on. We say that he's allowed to take it off. Well, he's allowed to put it back on if he takes it off. So Namitanina, that's a Mishnah. What's Ula telling me by saying that? That you're allowed to return a bandage in the base of English, but not in the rest of the country. Where it says, I could have thought in the base of English there's no rabbinic prohibitions. The lav baravaidahu, that anyone can put a bandage back on, even if he's not doing the service. I could have thought that that's the shot. I mean, there's another way of understanding this. Anyone can take off a bandage and put it back on Yom Tov. And there's no problem. Because ain't Shvus V'Mikdash. But a bandage is a problem of refuah. The problem of refuah is that it's a decree. You might end up grinding herbs. And that's a biblical prohibition. So you shouldn't do any refuah unless it's really necessary. So, but that's all rabbinic. So I'd say in the base of English, there's no shvus, there's no rabbinic prohibitions. So we'd say that anyone is allowed to do this. Kamash Malani, Tir Seifim Shem Tchilas, and the Baravayda in, the Lav Baravayda like. Ula is coming to tell me that that's not true. You're really not allowed to do this in the base of English. It's only someone that wants to do the service, that needs to get the bandage off his hand to be able to hold the utensil without a chatzitza between his hand and the utensil. He's allowed to put the bandage back on afterwards. Right. We can come back. What about opening the barrel? We have a Mishnah. Someone opens a barrel. We said that the tumah that the amaretz put on it is suspended, is not more than suspended, that it doesn't exist even after the Yom Tov. And someone that started the dough on the holiday, it doesn't become tummy. Rabbi Yudam Yigmar, that even after the holiday you can finish. The Chum say you can't. We have a Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda says this. It says, I could say that the amaretz and the regal is not tummy at all. And it doesn't have to do with selling items. And even if he touches something that's not for sale, it's also not tummy. Kamash Malan, it's only if you open the barrel because you wanted to sell it, because you wanted to sell the wine. So that's when we say that it's tahar. But just the blanket statement that that everyone is tahar on the regal, that's not true. It's just because we wanted you to open it up, we say that the barrel of wine that someone is going to touch is going to remain tahar afterwards as well. The Gemara says, why didn't Ula mention the other two cases that Rachva said, that opening barrels and starting the dough, that it doesn't become tummy even after the Yom Tov? So the Gemara answers, beplugta like a Mayri. Ula wasn't saying things that were a machlokes. And there's a machlokes here about the Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, if it remains tummy afterwards. So Ula didn't want to get into that. Yeah, someone said there was this fellow it was in Lakewood. It's an older man. In Lakewood they have some older bachman. This person happened to be married, but his wife was killed by the Nazis. His name was Rav Moshe Abba Kamyan. Apparently he was a big Talmud Chacham, but he went a little crazy after because of the war or whatever. anyway, so he would walk around the yeshiva and he would like say like a vitz. So it's like little, like sharp thing. So one of the things he said was Hashem Berachas Abram Bakal. Hashem blessed Abram with everything. Medrash says that Bakal means a daughter. So it's Bakal with everything. What does that mean? It means a daughter. Blessed him with a daughter. So there's two opinions. If Bakal means a daughter or it doesn't mean a daughter. So he asked, so how come when he's looking for a shidduch for Yitzchak, why doesn't he let Yitzchak marry the daughter? Because it's before Matan Torah. Doesn't have to go to the Charan. They said because it's a machlekes if it's a daughter, and he didn't want to make chasna with machlekes. So anyway, okay. So bepluk to like Hamayri. Ula wasn't talking about anything that's a machlekes. The Gemara says, well, 1 second, it's not true because Hanach Nami plucked in inu. It's not true. The other cases are also machlekes. So the Gemara says because it's machlekes Bishama and Bisil in our Mishnah. The Gemara says well, that's not considered a machlekes. You know why? Because Bishama Makam Bisil ain't a Mishnah. Bishama doesn't count. It's a machlekes. But if you don't count one side, because they're not significant, so then there goes the machlekes, right? Okay. The Gemara says Masnisin like Tana. Our Mishnah doesn't fit with the following Tana. The Tanya was started in a brayso from Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Reb Shimon ben Elazar taught. Shimon ben Elazar is a student of Reb Meir. It says, everyone agrees that you're allowed to take the shutters off a store on Yom Tov. The whole machlek is if you're allowed to put it back on. Remain machzirin. Bishame says that you're not allowed to return it. Bitzil says you are allowed to return it. Doesn't fit with our Mishnah. Okay. Then it goes on and it says like this. When do we say that there's a machlekes that's only if there's a hinge? Because the hinge is very similar to building. You put it back on with the hinge, you put the hinge in place, that's considered building. But if there's no hinge, then everyone agrees that it's permissible. The Gemara says, Tanya, but the problem is we have another brayso that says exactly the opposite. When do we say that there's a machlekes that's only if there's no hinge? But if there is a hinge, everyone says that it's forbidden. Exactly the opposite. Amar Abaya explains. If the hinge is in a normal place on the side, like the shutters would open on the side, so then that's considered building. Elam tzir kolikar, if there's no hinge at all and you just had to like push it in like a cork, so then everyone agrees that that's permissible. So the question is if there's a hinge on the top, which was a little bit abnormal. One opinion, which was Bishamai, said that there's a hinge. Oh, the hinge is a problem. The hinge on the side is a problem. The hinge on the top is also a problem. And Basil held that the hinge on the side is a problem, yes, but the hinge on the top is not. It's similar to like having no hinge, which everyone says is permissible. Okay, on Daf Yomi. This was yesterday's Daf. Now, Daf Yomi has the machlekes here, has a discussion here, which is probably the most important discussion in the whole Masechta. It affects all of Hilchos Yom Tov. Yeah, it's like the heart of all of Hilchos Yom Tov. You'll see. Beishamai says, "In mitzian leis hakatan v'leis halula v'leis sepeter l'shus rabim b'sil matirin." Beishamai says you're not allowed to carry a child or a lulav or a sefer Torah. All of these things seem like they're mitzvah items. What's the katan? What's the mitzvah there? But he says you're not allowed to carry them. You're not allowed to carry them on Yom Tov. Basically, you're not allowed to carry on Yom Tov, according to Beishamai, except for food. Beishamai agrees that achila, tzorech achila, you're allowed to do malachas that are necessary for eating on Yom Tov, that he agrees to. But if it's not necessary for eating, then you're not allowed to. Bisil matir and Bisil says you are allowed to. You're allowed to carry. Okay. What's going to come out over here is a discussion called Mitaich Shehutra L'Torah, Hutra Nami Shalei L'Torah. Beis Hillel holds that if this is a malacha that's done for food, it becomes permissible even if it's not for food. Beis Shammai says no, the malacha doesn't become permissible. It's only permissible if you need it for food. So for example, when it comes to carrying, you're allowed to carry a kugel from one place to another because you're going to eat on Yom Tov. You're allowed to carry that along, but you can't take along your siddur. You can't take your talus. You can't take the stroller. That's maybe there's a hat there for something. If there's only food over there or something. But otherwise you can't carry. You can only carry food, mamish. He still says no. You're allowed to carry whatever you need. Your teas, because carrying became permissible. The term for this is mitaich. Mitaich is like since. Since it became permissible for this, it became permissible for everything. Yeah, the extreme examples of this would be you're allowed to kill mosquitoes on Yom Tov. Why? Because I'm allowed to chef. If I'm allowed to chef, that means I'm allowed to kill. I'm allowed to kill, I can kill. Okay. That's a machlekes. This is not a halacha shia. But no, I'm just giving you the extent of it. That you follow? Okay. Tani Tana Kamei de Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. The Tana taught in front of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. It says like this. If someone shares a private donation animal, a sacrifice, a kayan probably. Well, you don't need a kayan, but it's in the Beis Hamikdash. He shechs on Yom Tov a carbon that was not a chayvas hayoim. It wasn't a carbon musaf or a carbon tamid. It was a carbon that's supposed to be brought not on the holiday. He gets malchus. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi says, Amar lei, damalach mani. Who told you that? Where are you getting this from? That you get malchus for shechting on Yom Tov because it wasn't necessary to be done on Yom Tov. Beis Shammai. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai. The Amri, la yamrina mitaych shotcha hitzal l'tzarech, but you're not mishlei l'tzarech. Beis Shammai says that we don't say because you're allowed to carry when it's necessary, you're also allowed to carry when it's not necessary. The Beis Hillel, because if you think you're following Beis Hillel, Amri, they say that if you're allowed to carry when it's permissible, when it's necessary, you're also allowed to carry when it's not necessary. So in our case also, because you're allowed to shecht when it's necessary, you can shecht when it's not necessary. So where do you get this from? That is Malchus. Maskeflo Rabba. Rabba has a question. I know you know there's a Mishnah here, but how do you know that's the pshat in the Mishnah? The Mishnah talks about carrying a katan or a lulav or a sefer Torah. That's not food. You think that has to do with, is haitzah entirely permissible because it could be used for food, and so therefore it becomes totally permissible even if it's not for food? You think that's the machlekes. How do you know that's the machlekes? Maybe the machlekes is not mitaych. Maybe the machlekes is there such a thing as haitzah at all? Is haitzah one of the malachas of Yom Tov? Maybe haitzah means carrying. Is carrying an issue? Haitzah is like a different status, a different type of malacha. Usually the 39 malachas are creative. Haitzah is a different sort of malacha. There's no you don't change anything, you just move it. That's Taisus has a discussion about that. Okay, Dilma, maybe the Erev Vaitzal Shabbos main Erev Vaitzal Yom Erev Vaitzal Shabbos main Erev Vaitzal Yom Tov K'miplugi. Maybe the machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is not if I say that a malacha becomes entirely permissible because it has one permissible scenario, and then it becomes entirely permissible. Maybe the machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is if there's a rule that there's a prohibition of haitzah on Shabbos, But there's no prohibition of Eitzah and Yom Tov. What's going to happen is it's not going to apply to Shechita or anything else. Maybe it just has to do with Eitzah. One opinion holds that there's an Erev, a requirement to make an Erev, and there's a prohibition to carry on Shabbos. There's also a requirement to make an Erev on Yom Tov and a prohibition to carry on Yom Tov. That's Beis Shammai. And Beis Hillel holds there's no such thing as carrying on Yom Tov. It doesn't have to do with mitoich, because mitoich would extend to all malachas. It just has to do with Eitzah. Quotes a pasuk in Yirmiyah that says you can't carry, don't take a load out of your house on Shabbos. See, it says Shabbos. I know there's a pasuk that says, Rashi's pasuk for Eitzah is Vayavir kol b'machane l'sitziu mibatechem. Don't bring any more. The Malacha Yetadayim, I think that's what it says. Rashi's pasuk is when they were bringing the items to the donations to the Mishkan, they said, "Okay, we have enough." I think that's what the pasuk was. Okay. Okay. The Shabbos in the Yom Tov light, that it's only on Shabbos. You see the pasuk in Yirmiyah that it's only on Shabbos. Okay. That's the question that Rabbah has to Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi. How do you know that the Machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is the way you're thinking? Maybe the Machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel has to do strictly with Eitzah. Maskefler Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef has a question on his question, which we call an answer, but he puts it as a question. Elameata, if that's the case, why are they arguing about a child, a lulav, and a sefer Torah? They should be arguing about stones. It's interesting Rashi over here that explains this Gemara like this, that the original gezerah of muktzah was based on people were carrying on Shabbos. And in order to stop, when they came back from Babel after the exile, first we went south of Babel, they came back to Eretz Yisrael. So people weren't keeping Shabbos properly. They were carrying it. So Nehemiah made this institution that no one's allowed to touch the institution of muktzah. That you're not allowed to touch anything that's not absolutely necessary. It was only like your eating utensils you're allowed to touch, nothing else. Otherwise, they're concerned that you may end up carrying. And then muktzah became less and less over the time people were keeping, so they lessened it. You're allowed to touch a keli, even if it's not anything that's an actual utensil you can touch, and then even a keli shemlach, so you can use leheter, and things became lighter. But it's all based on Eitzah, because they were carrying. Now, if there's no prohibition of Eitzah, then there's no prohibition of muktzah, because muktzah was only an outcome of people carrying. There's no problem of carrying on Yom Tov, according to the way Rabbah is suggesting, that Yom Tov, according to Beis Hillel, doesn't have an issue of carrying, then there should be no issue of muktzah. So why didn't you choose something that's absolutely muktzah, like a rock, that you can carry that on Yom Tov? You tell me everything together. It must be that really there is a prohibition of Eitzah. It's just that it's hutra because of achila. Once it's hutra for achila, then it's hutra for other things. Since the Machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel isn't about stones, they must be arguing not if there's a concept of Eitzah. There's a concept of Eitzah. We just say that it's permissible because of mitaych shehutra. Since it's you're allowed to carry food, you can also carry other items. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan also holds this, that the Machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is about mitaych shehutra. Once it becomes permissible for things that are necessary for food, so it's also permissible for everything else. The Tani Tana Kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Someone taught in front of Rabbi Yochanan, there was a Tana Tana is someone that memorizes prices. So just like every university has a library. So in those days, it was every yeshiva had a Tana. He had a great memory, and he would just quote prices. And then it wasn't enough to memorize it. The Amira would then explain it. So it wasn't called Amira. The rabbi would then explain it. So he would say the brisa, and then Rabbi Yochanan would discuss it. So yeah, well, the Tosefta in the back was a collection of brises, but brisa is a general category. Brisa just means outside. Bar is the Aramaic word for outside. So anything that's outside the edited Mishnah is called a brisa. Tosefta is the type of brisa. It's added. It's Tosefta means it's an addition. And to the back of a book. Okay. Tani Tana Kamed the Rabbi Yochanan. The Tana taught in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Hamavashal Gid Anasha the Chalav. If someone cooks the Gid Anasha, the nerve that we don't eat, the sciatic nerve. Someone cooks it with milk, biyamtiv, on yamtiv, v'achlub, and then he goes ahead and eats it like a chamish. You hear what he's saying? He gets malchus 5 times. He did 5 prohibitions here. Let's see what the prohibitions are. Number 1, like a mishum mevashal gid. Now, there's a little star over there in my Gemara which says mishum mevashal gid biyamtiv. You have to add that in. First of all, he cooked on yamtiv. Cooking on yamtiv is no problem, but that's only because it's for food. But that's because if you see, there's a machlekes b'Shamai and b'Hillel if you're allowed to cook if it's not for food, because once you're allowed to cook, you should be allowed to cook even if you can't eat it. So b'Hillel would allow this. So the Tana, Rabbi Yochanan, is going to tell him that you're quoting b'Shamai. What are you telling me? Rabbi Yochanan is going to say, challenge him on this. But like him, he's also, the problem is that he's eating a gid anasha. You're not allowed to eat the gid anasha. But like him, you're also not allowed to cook milk and meat. And the gid anasha is meat, and the milk is, of course, milk. But like him, you're also not allowed to eat basar b'chalav. Remember, it says don't cook a kid and it smells milk 3 times. So one of them is to tell you that you're not allowed to cook it. You can't even turn on the fire. It's a problem with going to cooking school. It becomes very challenging for a person to even say, well, I'm not going to eat any of the food that they tell me to cook, but you can't even turn it on. You can't stir it. So you have to get the guy standing next to you. He also made a fire. How's he cooking? He had to make a fire. So that's 5. Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan tells the Tana, Puk Tani Lebra. Go teach this outside. This is like Rabbi Marlon would say, go check if it's snowing around the corner. This don't teach this in here. Havara Bishal ain't a Mishnah. Havara and Bishal, lighting a fire and cooking, it's not a Mishnah. And if you want to say that it is a teaching, a Mishnah, then you have to say it's Beishamai. That would be the opinion of Beishamai. They say that you're not allowed to, that you don't say just because you're allowed to carry when it's necessary, you're allowed to carry also when it's not necessary. We don't say that. You have a question? Okay. So, also over here, we're going to say that that we won't say that just because you're allowed to make a fire when it's necessary for cooking, you're also allowed to make a fire when it's not necessary. We don't say that. The Beis Hillel, because if you're going to say it's Beis Hillel, they say that you're allowed to carry, even if it's not necessary. Not even if it's not necessary, but even if it's not eating, even if it's not for food. That's the case, then you're allowed to make a fire, even if it's not for cooking. Cooking, that's not for eating. Okay. Let's try to go further. We have a new mission here. That was the sugya of Mitayf. So it comes out that although we pass like Beis, but there still needs to be a tzorech hayom. It can't just be that you're allowed to carry everything. It has to be a yom tov need as well. Follow? To be a tzorech hayom. You're allowed to take a chair outside because you want to sit outside. But you can't take the chair outside just because you're setting up, just for no. It's not necessary. It has to be all the malach has to be mamish that you need it as a yom tov need. It doesn't become entirely permissible. We're passing like Beis, but there's restrictions on that, which could make it look like we're passing like Beis Shammai. Right. Right. Well, some of these things could be also like preparation for after, but it has to be a need. Also, it has to be something that most people do. It has to be like a regular thing. There was an old discussion about you're allowed to smoke on Yom Tov. Is it enough of a frequent thing? Yeah, about 100 years now. Was it a frequent thing that would be that it's like a general need for everyone? So then they said, oh yeah, everyone does this. It's a general need, it's permissible. Now it becomes a shaila. Well, it's a shaila on several levels, but a yom tov shaila as well, besides for the health shailas and all of that.
If you wouldn't be smoking, you wouldn't be allowed to smoking.
No, if the majority of people smoke, then that would be, let's say there's no health issues, right? So then that would be, well, it's something that's done on Yom Tov, and then it would be, it's something that's done regularly, then it would be something that it would be permissible to light the fire and do all of that. But if it's something that no one does, just one person wants to do it, then that's a malacha that's not considered a real need. It's not considered a real need. Okay. Bishamai says, the Daf Yomi says not halacha you have to ask all your shilas to. Bishamai let's leave this instead of rushing through it. Let's leave it over here at the Mishnah. We'll stop right here. Okay. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay.